New tools for ecosystem builders. I'll talk about that today with Sherrod Davis from EcoMap on Culture Builder. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization for the community of technologists and entrepreneurs. What's going to be funny is I'm going to be trolled later because we don't call this Culture Builder anymore. And the last 3 times I've either done this podcast format or LinkedIn Live, I've called this a different thing. So for those who do watch Technically's chasing of the ecosystem building narrative, please know I don't know what this thing is called either. But we always have good and spirited conversations, which I'm excited to have with my friend Sherrod Davis, CEO of EcoMap. Sherrod, thanks for being here.
Of course, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So we timed this because EcoMap, which we'll get to in a sec, has new actual tools that we want to show. There's bit of a little bit of part of an unveiling. But let's take a half step back before we do that. Because you and I have run in similar circles for a long time. This concept of ecosystem building was for a long time from a lot of friends that you and I know. A lot of people put work into giving that concept legs. But for most of the last 20 years, in some sense, that was kind of like a jargony phrase that some friends talked about, ecosystem building. But it's been on the march, especially post-pandemic, and is now familiarizing itself in trade certifications, in job titles. Give me a look by way of introduction of EcoMap, because you work, sell to, and engage so many people who call themselves ecosystem builder. What's happening? Why is and how is this concept going from jargony phrase to kind of more proper title and identity?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, Chris. I talk to folks in the field and have for a long time, the better part of the last 5 or 6 years. And what we talk about is sort of a quote unquote professionalization of this industry. And so when I first got involved, and others who are quote unquote the sort of OGs of the space have schooled me on it, right? It was a few people in a room that sort of were coming up with some of these things, coming up with some of these tenets. And I think as time has gone on, I think folks in more traditional positions of power have started to recognize the need, the value of ecosystem building. And so if you think about ecosystem building as a mechanism for economic development, I think what economic developers are starting to learn is that ecosystem building can be that lever that helps you to skip a couple levels. And that's because of the approach, that's because of the engagement with boots on the ground or entrepreneurs. And so it's really about ecosystem building, driving connectivity within an ecosystem in order to support entrepreneurs and small business owners so that they can start and grow their businesses more easily. And that's one of the key tenets, I think, of the economic development strategies we're seeing all across the country, as you know. And it's like, how are we going to do the work? Well, one of those strategies centers on ecosystem building, which I think is what we're seeing.
Yeah, I love that. I'll do a quick self-plug, though, for some look-backs Technically have done in our reporting coverage. I wrote a piece a couple years back charting the ecosystem building metaphor. Starts as a business metaphor in the 90s. It gets kind of brought back up in the early 2000s, and then post-Great Recession gets a lot of like new love as we looked for like a new corner of an American economy. And now, as you say, properly professionalizing. Okay, that makes sense, Sherrod. I got tons of questions there, but I don't have enough time. So let's go a little bit. Remind folks again, what is EcoMap at core? Yeah. And then what are you guys more freshly unveiling and why? And how does it relate to the professionalizing of this role?
Yeah, so we build technology to power modern ecosystems. So we work with economic developers, we work with ecosystem builders, at state and local government, universities, nonprofits, accelerators, incubators, you name it. Our point of view is that ecosystems are everywhere. and that they can be powered, they can be supercharged with the right set of technology tools. And so we started quite specifically as an organization that mapped ecosystems. So what are the assets, the resources, the organizations? What are the actual elements of the ecosystem? And historically, when we first started this work, people were doing this by way of consultants. They were creating spreadsheets, PDFs. Part of the challenge there was that it was a snapshot in time. And so 3 weeks later, 6 months later, certainly a year later, you either needed someone to update those elements to reflect what had happened and what was happening in the ecosystem, or you were just using antiquated, out-of-date information. And so by introducing technology, we created this living, breathing, dynamic platform that was responsive of and reflective of the actual happenings, activities, and opportunities within the ecosystem. So we called these like digital front doors to the ecosystem. How can someone come in, quickly uncover information, therefore use that information? As we continued to work with our customers over time, we learned that there was a huge opportunity to help build what we're now referring to as like digital connective tissue. So within any ecosystem, there's multiple organizations that are typically coming together because they're united by a common cause or a common purpose, but yet there's no digital infrastructure that's really purpose-built so that those organizations can work together on support for an entrepreneur or to have access to a single source of truth of data. And so today we're introducing what we're calling ERM, which stands for Ecosystem Relationship Manager. That's really meant to facilitate collaboration, data sharing, and ultimately track and measure the impact of ecosystems at large and the impact of specific elements within that ecosystem as it relates to supporting entrepreneurs.
Really interesting. And I get the reference to CRM, which was, again, not just 20 years or so ago, wasn't a thing. And now it's such a dominant category that so many professionals, can't quite imagine a world without it. So I imagine there's something similar here. Actually, do you think a lot in metaphor? Because like when I look at EcoMap, and you and I talk a ton about this because we technically, run in so many similar circles, there is like an emerging, evolution of an industry. There's $2.5 trillion gets put into state and local economic development, and some of that is moving toward entrepreneurship. You alluded to a little bit ago why, but there are these big macro trends. Workforce is getting older. We have very contested immigration policies right now. Business and talent attraction. We're relocating Americans less than we did a few generations ago. And so the idea of you have to grow up some of the workforce you want to have is giving new life to workforce development and entrepreneurial engagement. There's like very big, meaningful, real things happening that make this work not trivial. Are there other industries that you look at and say, oh, that happened over in that industry and it's now happening to the one that we're in, and we're like using that as a cheat code to know what needs this industry is going to have, and we're going to build them? For an example, CRMs, people are going to want to track impact. We're going to build that. Is that how you guys think, or is it too different from other industries?
No, in some ways it is, Chris. In other ways, it's incredibly unique. Like, I think what's interesting about ecosystems is probably most of the interactions are inter-organizational. So two organizations that are not technically affiliated. There's no technical governance over the fact that they are working together, and yet they are. And so I think what typical tools, historical tools, even things like CRM, which are designed to look inside of an organization, the way in which they fall short for ecosystems is all about collaborating and collaborating across organizations. I think the one parallel that I will quickly talk about is not necessarily industry focused, but it's sort of like personnel focused, and that's customer success, actually. So 20 years ago, certainly before SaaS started emerging, there was no one knew what customer success was, right? There was customer support. You call and you ask a question and hopefully you get an answer. But customer success was something a bit more meaningful. And so as that profession started to become more popular, it started to deliver more value, then you started to see some of the professionalization there as well, like tools purpose-built for customer success, like convenings specifically focused on customer success. That is where I think we see the parallel with ecosystem building, is in like the emergence of a profession rather than like this industry sort of looked like our industry today.
I've written a bit about job titles because there's a sterility to them that it's easy to overlook. But like, we know where the chief people officer title comes from. It is origins with Google, and there's other examples where we see where something initially feels either jargony or kind of like jokey to then just becoming normal. And a generation later, folks don't even quite realize that we had to insert this language and ecosystem. Maybe I should look a little closer, but I don't know of many job titles that are so inherently metaphorical. And I think what you just spoke to and what I hope a lot of us are trying to like inculcate into economic development is what you described. The origin of the metaphor of ecosystem is we know now that environments are deeply unhealthy if you only have one kind of species or one size species. And people maybe know that, but you and I both know that lots of places struggle with the corporate that employs a lot of people matters. The crush of new tries matter because some of them are going to create most net new jobs, but a lot of them will go nowhere. And there's chaos in the system by nature, and there's different sides, and there's overlap and redundancy, and coordination is difficult. And some of the lack of alignment is inherent in the system, just like not all species in a given ecosystem are working all together. So that was a lot, but I guess I'm curious, like how do you picture the ERM, the ecosystem relationship manager, playing with the natural strengths of an ecosystem? Like how do you hope this plays out? Maybe even give us a little example use case of how this would show up in the environment.
Totally. Yeah. So what we've seen from an ecosystem building sort of strategy and tactic standpoint across a number of geographies is this concept of like a navigator. Like we need someone who our entrepreneurs or small business owners can call, email with, get on a text basis with, ask a question, and they can walk hand in hand with you into the room. And that's great. Typically what those folks are doing is they're making referrals to other organizations, to investors, to other founders. But right now, there's no mechanism really to say, wow, that was a really beneficial referral. And so when you start to do that dozens, hundreds of times a year, what you're missing out on is the ability to tell your impact story. And so what we hope ERM does across a series of organizations, again, that are united by a common purpose or cause, is start to establish the foundational layer of truth into what is happening in the ecosystem, so that later on, 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, we can say, wow, that referral helped that founder get an investment, or that referral led to that small business owner breaking into a new market, whatever it might be. And it's this longitudinal and collaborative nature that we're really trying to harness and support using this ERM technology.
The trying to like create almost data around it seems important. I know we're running out of time here, but you're making me like I've sat in a lot of rooms where people say the right words, but you know somewhere they're not going to take this seriously. And I have a lot of sympathy because a lot of these either policymakers or broad economic development leaders or sometimes it's a large corporate that has kind of a civic vibe to it in a given region. They'll say the nice words, but at the end of the day, they're looking right now about who moves the most jobs in a given region, who carries the most weight. It's just easier to call one person from a large company than a wide array of startups or whatever. So I see this kind of what emerges out of EcoMap is you kind of hope someone's going to be that EcoMap customer to try to say like we're trying to like help be at least leading or at least pointing the direction of where this ecosystem is going. And we're gonna get some tools and resources to stand this place up. But we know there's going to be a ton of ecosystem chaos underneath the hood. So in this case, the ERM, one large entity kind of like makes it happen, but then lots of smaller organizations would be contributing. You know, I'm this entrepreneur support org over here, and I'm an SBA person over here, and I'm an incubator person over here, and I'm a co-working manager over there, and I'm the university person over here, and I'm just a mentor, and I'm an angel network. That's kind of the dream that they would all be saying how I'm serving this entrepreneur in this given region.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris. That's one model. That's one model where there's, you know, a large organization within an ecosystem collaborating with other smaller or more specific organizations. But then there are also flat models or networks that we're really excited about too, where actually, you know, the organizations might be of similar size and they're sending a lot of email back and forth, or they might be using a messaging tool, but it still isn't capturing that concept of a centralized source of truth, the ability to measure and monitor impact over time as it relates to your organizational activity and the activity of the collective network altogether. So when you go talk to that funder, you can say, here's how many entrepreneurs we supported. Here's where they started. Here's where they are today. And here is why we believe this network is powerful. And we're stronger together when trying to grow this ecosystem than trying to do it on our own.
I'm long, but I just wanted to touch on this little pilot we have running, and I will get you out here. I just want to mention this. I think this is interesting. Our teams are collaborating technically in our Baltimore coverage. If you go to any Baltimore news stories, what is, of course, not going to pop up for me right now, because why would it do that? Because that would have been just too convenient for me for that to work. But we have an EcoMap chat bot that is trained on the resources that an EcoMap install has in Maryland, and some archived reporting from technically, because it's in kind of the body of resources for folks to then use a chat bot to get resources. Kind of just wondering why does that tool exist more generally, and what's interesting about us doing it together as a pilot of the tool.
Totally. The tool exists because we're on a mission to make information accessible, information within ecosystems accessible, so it's easier for people to navigate those ecosystems. So we have a platform. That's what most people know us by. But with the emergence of AI, we thought another interface by which to engage with that information could be a chatbot, and that made a lot of sense for people to be able to ask a natural language question and receive an answer in response. A part of the reason I love working with you, Chris, is right? Like if we're focused on information accessibility and you all have an audience and a platform to help amplify that information, to me, it makes a ton of sense to leverage each other's strengths to accomplish both of our missions, which is ultimately to enable ecosystems to grow and thrive, with information accessibility being at the foundation, so that everyone has a fair shot, and ecosystem building and entrepreneurship can be the high tide that raises all boats.
And I just had to do a quick reboot. I'll just note here on the screen for those who are watching, if you go to any technical stories of any Baltimore market, the chat bot pops up in the bottom right corner, and you can ask it questions about resources or trends and news, and it's a mix of pointing to EcoMap resources in the directory and existing news and directly information. And I think you're interestingly pointing out Sherrod, that there is this idea of we're going to have many different platforms to engage information. So there's like information stewards, and there's how you distribute that information, and that can happen a lot of different places. It might be a website, it could be a mobile app, it could be a chat bot, it could be a text exchange. There's so many different ways that can exist, and I see EcoMap as this helping ecosystems gather that information. Sherrod, never have enough time with you. I appreciate this. Thanks for the work that you do.
You got it, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you soon.
See you next time. Bye.
All right, bye.